Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. This is my name is Ancuța Vameșu. I'm the facilitator of this meeting. I'm happy to welcome you all in this webinar dedicated to sharing the methodology and results of the independent verification by sole association of the company HS Timber, previously known as Schweighofer Holz Industry. The objectives of our 1-hour webinar is to share information about the methodology and results of this independent verification and to engage with you stakeholders, providing you an opportunity to raise comments and questions. Of course, we expect that following this meeting, the stakeholders will be better informed about the process and the findings. So we are really happy to share. A few words about myself. I have extensive experience with civil society organizations in my country, Romania, as well as Republic of Moldova. And I've also advised governments, central and local governments, in working with civil society, strategic planning for local development and social economy. So I am happy to be able to assist FSC in engaging with its stakeholders for this very important verification. Yeah. Now a few housekeeping rules and a little introduction in how we will be proceeding. For Romanian stakeholders, please be aware that simultaneous translation is available, so you can listen in Romanian as well as English. You can pick the language in which you want to listen by going in the bar and you click on the sign, a little globe sign which says interpretation, so you can pick the language that you prefer to. You can submit comments and questions using the chat panel. We really encourage you to use the chat panel. Like this, we can also see whether there will be similar questions, and will allow also our presenters to prepare for preparing their answers. We can group and use time more effectively in this way. But of course, if someone would really like to speak, you can ask the word by raising the hand in the reactions button down in the bar. You can choose raise your hand, and then if time allows, we will definitely give you the floor. Otherwise, you can just use the chat box. If for some reason somebody prefers to anonymously ask a question, you are kindly asked to direct this to Janet McKay privately through the Zoom chat, and then she would share this with us. We have, of course, given priority to questions submitted beforehand. As you know, you had this opportunity of already submitting your questions before. So we will start our Q&A session by addressing these questions previously submitted. The webinar will be recorded and made public, giving thus the opportunity to more participants that maybe today were not able to be with us to hear the presentation, and of course the discussion that we will be having in the Q&A session. So we really hope you agree with this, the fact that all discussions will be recorded, in the understanding that this is meant to give more people opportunity to follow this very important process. How we propose to use the time and in order to allow as much engagement as possible is, first we will give the floor to FSC Director Salem Jones. She will set the scene for us, presenting the context in which this verification was conducted, and describe the process by which the verifier has been appointed. And then we will give the floor to the independent verification team, who will present the methodology that they have used in order to conduct the audit, the team that was involved, the sampling procedure they have used, the stakeholders that were also engaged during this verification process, and the contents of their report. They will present main results and findings, and of course conclusions, which are the most important part, and I'm sure you want to listen to. Then we will return to Salem just to give us the next step in the roadmap for FSC, the whole investigation process and what comes after this one. And we hope to be to finish these 3 topics in our agenda roughly in about half an hour to allow them to move into questions and answers. I hope you agree with this agenda so that we can move forward. So now I will turn to Salem Jones to give us the context and the background of this whole investigation and the identification of the verifier. Salem, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Ankuta. My name is Salem Jones. I am the program manager for the dispute resolution program at FSC International. I've been with FSC Global Development since 2012. I was previously legal counsel working with the legal department at FSC before moving to dispute resolution. And I, with my colleague Amparo Ariano, are working on policy for association cases, the processing of those cases, and also the evaluations for ending disassociations through the policy for association. What I would like to do today is to give you an overview of the process that we have undertaken in verifying the HS Timber conditions framework. For those of you unfamiliar with the case, the FSC disassociated with HS Timber in 2017, and we developed a conditions framework in which, under which laid out requirements with verification indicators that HS Timber would need to implement in order to end that disassociation. And where we are today is HS Timber has informed FSC that they have implemented the conditions framework, the requirements which FSC has laid out. And the FSC has now taken a look at this implementation, and it is our job now to set up a verification process in order to evaluate the implementation of the FSC requirement set, to understand whether HS Timber has successfully implemented these requirements. FSC's role is to ensure that this verification process is conducted independently and according to our rules for third-party verification, and ultimately to review that verification to assess its quality and the viability of the conclusions, to inform the FSC Board of Directors to review whether FSC can end the dissociation with HS Timber. The verification process and the selection of the verifier has followed FSC's internal rules for procurement, which calls for a transparent and inclusive request for proposal framework, which includes an open call for proposals from qualified organizations that meet the quality criteria and competencies for the request for proposal. FSC then reviews and evaluates all of the proposals received. We provide those companies that have submitted a proposal to ask us questions to clarify any issues in the request for proposal. We then conduct an interview with the shortlist candidates, and ultimately the the shortlisted 1 or 2 organizations are then put through a conflict of interest disclosure process, wherein any any conflict of interest is disclosed. This conflict of interest includes financial conflict, association or relationship conflict, and any topical or organizational conflict. Once this conflict of interest check is performed, FSC works to identify obviously any conflict and to mitigate any perceived conflict from escalating into an actual conflict. FSC, in following this procedure, ultimately chose soil association for the third-party verification of the HS timber conditions framework. We chose soil association because they have the 20 number years of experience working in Romania. They've proposed a very senior auditing team with a lot of experience on the ground auditing in Romania. And ultimately they had the most qualified proposal of those received. I would like to hand back to Ankuta to introduce Soil Association.
Yes, so thank you, Sarah. So I hope everybody now has understood the context in which the verification has been carried out. And I will swiftly now hand over to Rob and Janet, who will take us through the methodology that they have employed to conduct this verification and describe already the results. So, Rob, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Ankuta. Thanks, Salem. Hello, everybody. My name is Rob Shaw. I'm Technical Manager with Soil Association. We are a UK-based certification company, long established, and the whole company covers organic, beauty, textiles, and forestry schemes globally. The forestry team has around about 50 staff based in the UK, Europe, and Africa, and we have over 150 agent and contractor personnel around the world. With a global network of 12 agents. We offer FSC and PEFC certification, and we have over 3,000 certificates, and we currently certify over 25 million hectares of forest around the world, which makes us one of the top 4 or 5 certification bodies for FSC globally. I'm going to take you through a few slides now in terms of how we conducted the verification. Next slide, please. So just to introduce the team, some of my colleagues are on the call today. Jeanette, my colleague, will talk shortly about the stakeholder consultation process, and the rest of the team are on the screen there. Christina and Marius are staff employees of Soil Association, and they're both Romanian nationals, and they're based in Romania. Stanislav and Alex, who were part of the on-site team, are very experienced contract auditors from Bulgaria. And Penny Bienz and Michael Bai were part of the remote team working with myself, and they are independent contractors who are very experienced in chain of custody and assurance system auditing, and they've been contractors of ours for a long time. So there's just a few slides now giving you some more information about the team, so we can just pass over these slides. Thank you. Okay, so our proposal included a combination of on-site auditing and remote auditing, and the on-site team were based in Romania and Ukraine. We were obviously operating under COVID pandemic conditions, but we made physical visits to all of the HS production sites in Romania and a selection of their suppliers, both in Romania and Ukraine. And we were working to an audit checklist or a verification checklist created from the conditions framework document. For the remote audits, the UK-based team worked using Microsoft Teams through a combination of file sharing and video streaming interviews. As part of the planning for the verification, we selected 45 HS Group employees and related personnel, and we chose them particularly on the basis of their job role and their responsibility linking to due diligence systems and timber purchasing and supply chain control. So over the space of a week within the audit itself, we interviewed 45 people, and we also did a thorough document review, and we kept in close communication with our colleagues in country. In terms of planning the supply chain sampling, we adapted from FSC normative standards, because obviously this is a bespoke process, and we used criteria based on risk and scale and complexity, and the methodology is fully described in the public summary report. But in essence, we sampled 30 sites over a 2-week period, which included supplying sawmills, supplying log yards, and some shadowing, also some forest-based visits. And I'll allow Jeanette now just to talk about the stakeholder consultation. Thanks, Jeanette.
Yeah, so the stakeholder consultation was conducted in line with the standard FSC consultation procedures, which allowed consultees a 6-week period to respond. We contacted a wide variety of consultees from governmental and non-governmental sources and sectors covering environment, social and the timber industry. And we compiled a list of more than 1,000 consultees using information from FSC International, FSC Ukraine, our own consultation list that we use within those countries, and also information from HS Timber. The initial consultation was conducted to all of the consultees via email, and we followed up with virtual meetings and phone calls with respondents to discuss any issues they'd raised, and also arranging meetings with key consultees to have direct conversations with them. All the issues that were raised were investigated, and all the responses, positive and negative, are in the report with our findings from the audit.
Okay, thanks, Jeanette. Moving on. So the culmination of the independent verification was that the team produced a report. This report went through a technical review at Soil Association with a colleague who was not involved in the process, and ultimately a public summary report was produced and submitted to FSC. So this is a GDPR compliant and redacted report, but otherwise it contains all of the key components, and it's available on the FSC website to view. The report contains findings which I'll go into, and I think, yes, so in terms of the results and the findings, we found no major non-compliances. We identified 4 minor non-compliances and 11 observations. And just to touch upon those definitions, we adapted the FSC definitions of non-conformance from their standard 20001, which is a certification body standard, whereby a major non-conformity would be a systemic, continuing over a long period of time, affecting a wide range of the criteria, and ultimately affecting the integrity of the potential outcome. Conversely, a minor finding would be either temporary or non-systemic, or showing that whilst there was a system, the system was not being adversely affected. So that's the premise on which we based our opinions. Observations, for anyone who's not fully aware of these terms, would be where we have found conformance, but we're pointing out to HS that there is a potential in the future for non-conformance. But the observations are not formal findings as such, however they are presented in the public summary report. The audit was generally a positive experience. There was cooperation provided at all stages by HS Group, and some of the improvements that we observed and verified within the audit are on screen now. So there was significant investment in policy, systems, procedures and training by HS in terms of supplier code of conduct, due diligence system and supply chain control. Evidence of stakeholder engagement, both through physical meetings and website and publications, development of their timber sourcing policy, and publications of sustainability reports, which are available on their website. We saw evidence of systems to identify and mitigate social and environmental impacts. And we saw a proactive stance taken by HS in this aspect. And as I've mentioned, a significant investment in a dedicated supply chain control team who carry out on-site supplier audits. There's also an audit, there's also a supply chain review process, including legal and media data collection, voluntary exclusion of sourcing from natural parks, and a preference for sourcing certified material where possible in high-risk areas. HS have also introduced their TIMFlow system, which sits alongside the national SUMEL system. So there's a variety of initiatives which are aimed towards meeting the criteria within the framework conditions document. There's also HS, we were able to verify that they have established a foundation, Tomorrow's Forests, or Padarai Taman, excuse my Romanian pronunciation. So this foundation has been established independently and has been seed funded with money towards restoration and various other forestry-based projects in Romania. Just to cover off the actual formal findings, we raised 4 minor findings, and I'll cover these briefly now. The first one covered evidence of training in code of conduct for staff. Whilst there was a high level of training achieved, we found that this was not complete, and HS were in the process of moving between software systems, and also the COVID pandemic had slowed the ultimate completion of this process. The second finding related to corporate internal audit systems and first-tier supplier audits. We recognized that these systems were in place, but we raised a minor issue around the consistency of the documentation of these systems and the way that the procedures are managed within the company. This relates to the fact that this system is very dynamic and was under development at the time, and there was active work to combine and align different software systems which were being used. The third finding was around traceability and due diligence system risk assessments. And again, this was a minor finding to do with the actual detail of the systems being involved. And we identified a need to improve some of the specific risk management around the potential for illegal wood to enter the supply chain, particularly through log yards, which are recognized as a high-risk environment. And then also in Ukraine, we pointed out that there was a lack of a consistent structure for the on-site assessment of some of the identified risks. The fourth minor finding was very specific, and it related to a timber documentation system checking process at one of the sawmill locations. But but this was acted upon immediately. It was quite technical and quite small, and so this finding was successfully closed during the audit. HS presented information to us which we accepted. So in conclusion, we found that there was generally good compliance with the FSC conditions framework document. We did not identify any major non-compliances, and we were satisfied that HS Group had taken significant steps to address the issues within the conditions framework document. So we then presented all of our findings and report to FSC, and I believe that's me now handing back to Ankuta.
Thank you very much, Rob. Now, this was a comprehensive overview. You also have the report posted for further reference, as I understood from Rob. Now, Salem will just let us know what are the next steps, what will be happening in this HS roadmap process. Please, Salem.
Thank you, Ankuta. So where are we now? We have the final verification report, which has been provided by Soil Association. This report, as Rob mentioned, has been posted on the FSC website for interested stakeholders to review. This final report, as well as the recommendation from the FSC Secretariat and the quality review of the verification, has gone to the FSC Board of Directors for their review last week. And in June, the FSC Board of Directors will be meeting to discuss the final report, the conclusions, and to decide on ending disassociation with HS Timber. After a board decision, and only after a board decision, in the case of ending disassociation, would HS Timber be able to proceed to scheduling a conformance assessment audit according to any of the FSC normative framework. So this would include controlled wood, chain of custody, or FM certification. What this means is that the minor cars which have been identified in the final report by Soil Association would have to be formally closed by an accredited certification body for HS Timber to enter into a certification agreement. So those minor cars will have to be formally closed before a formal FSC certification agreement could be made between HS Timber and an accredited certification body. Just to clarify that point.
Thank you, Salem. This is all in terms of next steps, right, Salem? So we can move now to the question and answers. And as I mentioned in the introduction, we will first take the stakeholder questions submitted in advance. We have, FSC has received 6 questions that we have summarized in this slide here. The first question was expressing concerns around wood traceability, in particular related to the log yard situation. And I think for this, Rob can make some comments and discuss further a little bit the issues around these concerns. Rob.
Yes, thanks, Ankuta. Just to comment on this briefly, our independent verification audit involved visiting some log yards and also looking at the due diligence systems which HS Timber have. So within their systems, they're obviously addressing international legality requirements such as EUTR and also domestic regulations. So the way that due diligence systems work are based around managing risk, and obviously even FSC and PEFC certification systems are not concerned always with tracking every physical log from every forest through the whole process. So it's a risk management approach, we did not find any significant issues with the way that the supply chain was being managed. In fact, HS Timber have knowledge of their Romanian supplies at the forest level, and they also have knowledge of their log yards. So with the combination of their due diligence system, their auditing, and the TIMFlow and SUMAL systems for satellite tracking of movements, we felt, in terms of what we looked at, what we sampled, and what we audited, that the system was working, and we were satisfied that there was no undue concern from what we saw.
Thank you, Rob. So please be reminded that we wait your questions in the chat box. Amparo also sent a message to everyone. So should you have questions, please use the chat box, or you can ask in Romanian as well, as we have interpretation, no problem. Then we still have 5 more questions which have been submitted in advance. This will be addressed by Sarah. First, there will be a set of 2 questions related to allegations or ongoing investigation. There will be a question related to HS holding some land ownership and issues around land ownership by HS. And the last one is related to the FSC standard that applies for HS. So Salem, can you please take us through this, the FSC reaction to this question?
Yes, thank you, Ankuta. So the first question is around the investigations by DCOT. So these are criminal investigations which have been alleged against specific individuals, some of them still employed by HS Timber affiliate organizations. And these DCOT investigations, as we have been able to determine, are not against HS Timber, the organization or the company or any affiliate company, but rather against specific individuals for antitrust and other kinds of collusion violations. These investigations, as according to our latest information, are ongoing. However, there have been no indictments issued against any employees of HS Timber. The next question is around alleged bribery cases for a company, a former company called Unilas out of Slovakia. This organization, or this company, was at some point affiliated with HS Timber, however, has since been dissolved, and there's no affiliation between HS Timber and this company. My latest information is that these bribery allegations are also not at all against or involving HS Timber or any HS Timber organization or affiliated organization. In addition to this, the bribery allegations around Unilas were not part of the original complaint investigation, meaning that the Unilas organization, there were no FSC requirements in the conditions framework established around Unilas, and therefore is also not part of the verification exercise that Soil Association has conducted on the conditions framework. So in this sense, outside of the scope of this verification exercise. But again, Unilas has been dissolved, and there's no allegation against HS Timber or any HS Timber affiliated organization. The next question is related to the legal land and restitution claims for former HS timber landholdings in Romania. The conditions framework identified requirements for a legal review of all of the restitution claims associated with HS timber landholdings to clarify the status of these restitution claims, and also to ensure that the restitution alleged had also been properly accounted for and properly paid. As this question infers, HS Timber indeed sold its land holdings in Romania and no longer is holding those lands. And so for the conditions framework, we were able to conduct a legal review of all of the former HS land holdings through the goodwill and the cooperation of the current owner of that land. So we were able to conduct a legal review of all of the outstanding restitution claims and landholding claims on those lands formerly held by HS Timber. This legal review was conducted by a law firm in Romania, and the public summary or the executive summary of the conclusions of that review are also available and have been posted. The next question is around the status of HS Timber within the FSC system. To be clear, HS Timber is not FSC certified. HS Timber has been disassociated from FSC and does not have an active FSC certification. In the case that the FSC Board of Directors would receive the conclusions from this verification report and determine that the conditions framework has been adequately fulfilled and decides to end disassociation with HS Timber, only then would HS Timber be eligible to start an FSC certification process. So at the moment, HS Timber is not within the FSC certification family. I would like to hand back over to you, Ankuta, to take some of the chat questions.
Yes, thank you, Saila. So far in the chat box, we have two questions. One is related, and I guess from what I read, but I will read them loud. First is related to Ukraine. It's by Roman Voloshanchuk. The question reads like this: major entry points of illegal wood into the Caucasus in Ukraine are forest logging plots and small private sawmills. Were those checked within your audit? I guess this is for Rob.
Yes, thanks, Ankuta. I'm actually going to invite my colleague Stanislav Lazarov, who was the audit team leader in Ukraine, to answer this question. Stanislav.
Hello, everybody. Well, during we had on-site visit in Ukraine, where we have visited five HS suppliers. Among these suppliers, we had 4 sawmills, 1 agent, and also 1 non-certified forest management unit.
Okay. Thank you, Stanislav. Now I will move to a question by Johannes Zanen. It's related to concern 1 and Ron's explanation. I think maybe he meant Rob's explanation. To my knowledge, an operator by EUTR has to check all wood before it is placed on the market, and only after a risk assessment and the result negligible risk, they are allowed to put it on the market. Did I understand right that SA is okay with the HS system that in general works but does not control all wood supplies to a level of negligible risk? I think maybe Rob again would be.
Yes, thanks, Ankuta. To maybe clarify what I was meaning during the presentation, our independent verification audit involves sampling. So again, I might just ask Stanislav to comment further on this point. So we can't see all of their operations. So we choose a sampling process, and then we go and visit different supply areas within the supply chain, which did include log yards. And I think some of the concern which has been expressed by stakeholders relates to a perception or perhaps an understanding that log yards are extremely high risk because they do involve mixing of timber from different sources before they then move on within the supply chain. And what I was saying was that we did not find any major issues with the documentation and the management and the systems being used within the sample that we visited. Stanislav, would you maybe like to comment further? You're on mute, sorry.
Stanislav? You have to click yeah,
Of
okay.
course. Sorry.
Okay.
Ankuta, may I ask you to read the question once again, please?
Okay, no problem. It says it's related to concern 1. To my knowledge, an operator by EUTR standards or some has to check all wood before it is placed on the market, and only after a risk assessment and the result negligible risk, they are allowed to put it on the market. Did I understand right that SA is okay with the HS system that in general works, but does not control all wood supplies to a level of negligible risk? This is the question.
Mm-hmm. Well, in terms of EUTR, in most of the cases, HS timber is not considered operator. So the timber is placed on the market by either from the forest management units or from the suppliers of HS. Therefore, in relations to EUTR, HS doesn't have too much work to do. However, in terms of legality of the wood, and I would say, and Rob already presented a lot of information related to this, I would say that we check thoroughly all the system and the procedure of which HS timber apply to ensure that all the wood that have certain risk of illegality. I would say that HS system is very comprehensive and adequate for tracing the wood entering the sawmill, and if you need further details on what is this system for and what are the details of this system, I would be happy to present according to my knowledge. But a lot of information is included in the report. It's publicly available. Therefore, I would say that we do not that we will not waste time to explain further.
Yes, there is a follow-up on this question, Stanislav. Johannes says, but maybe you can, I can send you in a chat and you can answer directly to Johannes to this one, because we already have about 3 more questions and I would like to move and address those. One question was about the countries covered by the report. I think, and please, Salem and Rob, correct me if I'm wrong. I think it was said in the beginning that the countries covered were Romania and Ukraine, and that is it. Not all the countries in which HS operates, correct?
That's correct. Yes, our scope that was part of the contract was to look at Romania and Ukraine. Whilst we were doing our verification activity, there was some discussion about supplies from Slovakia, and so there is a small amount of information in one of the observations and in the report about sourcing from Slovakia, but we did not have scope to go further than that.
Okay, so I hope this answers your question, Anders. Then I will move to a question by David Brunel. And I think this would be for Rob. How long before the visits were the sample of sites communicated to the organization? If you can specify this, Rob.
Yes, I can. Thanks, David. And again, if Stanislav could maybe comment further if needs be. Because we were operating in the COVID pandemic, environment, we had to have forward planning and logistics cooperation with HS Group, especially to travel between countries because of the COVID requirements. So we did not do any unannounced visits, but we tried to keep the forward notice as short as possible. Stanislav, would you maybe have any further detail on that? Again, you need to unmute, thanks.
Yep. We didn't have any unannounced visits of suppliers, also due to COVID situation. But we also take into consideration that this is a business relationships between HS and their suppliers, and we had appointment to audit HS, but we didn't have direct appointment with the suppliers. Therefore, in order to ensure this, to keep these business relationships between HS and their suppliers, we needed to announce all the suppliers that we will visit their facilities.
Thank you, Stanislav. Now there is a question from Anders, I guess for Salem. Could you please elaborate a bit more on HS and FSC controlled wood? Does the disassociation from FSC also includes FSC controlled wood? This is, yes, is it clear, Salem?
I think so. And if I don't get it right, then correct me. I believe the question is about whether HS timber is able to be a second party processor for FSC certified companies as controlled wood. Is this correct?
I would like maybe Anders to just quickly say yes or no in the chat box. Yes, correct, Salem.
Okay, Anders, thank you. So there is not currently a bar on disassociated companies from being a secondary processor for FSC controlled wood, meaning that that HS timber operations could be a secondary processor for companies that are FSC certified without breaking the FSC certification supply chain.
Thank you, Salem. I hope this is okay for Anders. David has a question which relates to Uniles, the bribery case in Ukraine. I think you, Salem, have discussed the Uniles, and it was about Slovakia. I'm not sure whether there is a misunderstanding. Here, David says Uniles bribery case in Ukraine. And he says, to my knowledge, this is an ongoing open case in Ukraine. being investigated by Ukrainian authorities. So I'm not sure who can.
I can say,
yeah.
maybe say a few things to this. No,
Yes,
David's
please.
correct. David's correct. The allegations are from Ukrainian authorities regarding UNILES. And again, this is outside of the scope of this verification process with HS Timber. And I think David's question is if FSC is going to follow up on the current status of the UNILES bribery investigation.
Yes, whether the FSC intends to contact Ukrainian authorities to inquire on the current status of this. This was his question, right?
So as it pertains to HS Timber, again, my latest information is that there's not a direct or indirect relationship or ownership relationship between HS Timber and UNILES, and therefore this would not be within the scope of direct or indirect ownership under the policy for association. So this would not be within the scope of our current engagement with HS Timber on this verification of the conditions framework. Now, David, as in the case that FSC would end disassociation with HS Timber in the near future and HS Timber would apply for an FSC certification, assuming in which the minor cars are closed and that process is free to continue. If there was any association between HS Timber and UNILES, which would point to a potential violation of the policy for association, this would trigger the need to clarify this point. But my information as it stands today is that this would not be the case.
That's all, Salem, thank you. I will move to Gradu Vlad. He has, I think, 3 questions, all related to the methodology for the on-site assessment, point 2, assessment of supply chains. So he has 3 questions just related to this aspect. I will read them very quickly because we still have like 6 more minutes, and I hope we can manage to answer him. It is not clear based on which evaluations the risk related to the identification of wood origin and legality was considered low for the forest management units when acting as direct suppliers selling wood standing. This refers to page 2, I think. Joint National Risk Assessment reveals that there are several specified risks also in relation to FMU's activities. And I think he lists them here: timber harvesting regulation, environmental requirements, payment of, this is one aspect. Then again, not clear what are the additional criteria for stratification and sampling also of suppliers. Was considered also as criteria the operator sourcing in areas considered with significant risk level. And the third, in order to assess the efficacy of DDS implementation in relation to trade and transport or determination of quantities and quality specified risk, the first placing on the market section for suppliers, IS, a critical control point that should be assessed through announced controls following a risk-based approach. Was this approach considered for field audits? And another question for, I'm not sure we can take that. I will stop here, Rob.
Yes, if I can just comment, if I've confused everyone, my apologies. But to be clear, the conditions framework document was the basis on which we were contracted. So we did not do an FSC chain of custody audit because obviously HS are not certified, they're in fact disassociated. So the process of potential reassociation, the conditions framework document sets out the requirements that we then verified. So our methodology was presented to FSC for approval, including our sampling technique and our auditing technique. So we're happy to provide further information out with this webinar, but I think we would run out of time if I tried to go into every detail. But in terms of unannounced audits, I think we've mentioned previously that because of the COVID pandemic and the logistics involved, that was not possible. However, the audit team in country and the remote team did choose a significant amount of sampling of purchase and sales documentation, and then followed audit trails, which HS Group would have been unaware of until the question was asked. So there were a variety of auditing techniques employed to follow audit trails for timber sourcing.
Thank you, Rob. Then there is also a proposal by Rado Vlad, who suggests that it would have been very useful for the report to be also accessible in Romanian. And I think a last question by him as well, if I'm not mistaken, or it's rather a comment by Mr. Vlad as well, in relation to condition framework. Stakeholder recommends to FSC that the audit team would have the necessary, sorry, I'm not sure, it's very long and I'm not sure I have the time to read it, as we are running out of time. Then there is a question about questions not answered here, whether they will be answered in writing. And this, yes, this we've affirmed from the beginning that all questions submitted in the chat box will be answered in writing to the person organization submitting the questions. So in particular, I guess this is very useful for very detailed questions like those submitted by Mr. Vlad. I'm not sure whether there are more questions or whether I missed any question. Otherwise, we are approaching towards the end of our discussion. And maybe I will just hand it over to Salem to say a few closing words to our stakeholders. I would like to thank you all for participating and attending and being active in submitting your concerns. I will hand it over to Salem for the final words.
Yes, thank you, Ankuta. Much appreciated. Also from our side, thank you very much for attending this webinar and for providing your questions in advance. Also for providing a lively discussion in the chat. We will, of course, get back to any of the questions that we received that we were not able to discuss in the webinar. We will provide you with a response. Also, we will be recording this webinar and also placing this on the FSC website for those that weren't able to attend to listen in and hear the webinar. So thank you very much for your attendance, and stay safe, stay healthy. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.
Thank you. Thanks, Ankuta.
Bye.